Hello all, Woodwork Geek back here again, this time a chaos board. This board is made up of lots of different species of wood. It's all of the offcuts and leftovers from the Union Jack board, plus another couple of board offcuts as well. Bit of a labour of love doing the chaos board. It's not a 5-minute job, and there are lots and lots of glue ups that all need to be perfectly done. So when I do a chaos board, I basically get all of the offcuts and then I run them through the drum sander like you can see here to get a very flat, clean edge, so I can then glue those parts back together to create a block, and that block I can then use to make the next phase of the chaos board. In essence, the chaos is just lots and lots of bits of wood all glued together in different patterns and joined together. Now obviously cutting all the strange angles and gluing them as a single block isn't possible, so the easiest way to do that is to create almost like panels that you then trim down, glue back together, and then another panel trim down, glue back together, so on and so forth. So here you can see me just making one of those panels. So you can see the offcuts from the Union Jack board. I'm just then using different pieces of wood. So the white maple is offcuts from creating the 2 centimeter strips for the Union Jack flag, and then you can see the walnut and Paduak bits there from the actual diagonals that are in there as well. And I just keep pushing those pieces together, keeping as many flat edges as I can, and clamping it up, making sure that I get good solid glue joints on each clamp up. And there you can see another piece in terms of the diagonals. So the diagonals are a little bit harder to get together. So the way that I did those is I used a disc sander off camera to get a flat surface, and then you can clamp them all together like you can see me doing here. I'm just using some hand cramps to keep the pieces as flat as possible. I really should use cauls, but I didn't have them for this job. Once you've got it glued together, I then cut it into strips, and then I go back through the drum sander. So that block has been cut into about 2-inch or 50mm kind of strips that I then run through to get to perfect glue faces again. And here's some other bits that I've glued up, and in essence I'm just trying to get 2 parallel sides that are perfectly flat, so no kind of gaps in the glue lines. And here you can see those pieces, and I'm just wiping the acetone on the Paduak just to get a better glue joint on that Paduak, because it's quite sensitive to glue. As you can see, one of those pieces fell in half from the previous glue joint, so I glued it back together, and there's another one there. Look. And you can see the random patterns starting to come together now, so all of those pieces are just cut, glued, clamped, and there I think that's about 45-46 centimeters wide, that panel now. And then what I do is I then chop that panel down in a minute just to make it into strips again, and then here you go, I can put a straight edge on the bandsaw. I love this bandsaw. I'm so glad I spent the money on that Felder bandsaw. So I get one flat edge on the bandsaw, as close to flat as I can on the bandsaw, and then I just run it through the planer just to get it perfectly flat. And then I set the bandsaw up with different thicknesses. So that was one thing that I did try with this chaos board, in terms of the strips that I cut weren't all the same dimension. So I did some thick strips and some thin strips to kind of aid the variation in the pattern, just to change it up a little bit, so you get as much random nature into it as you possibly can. You can see me doing a different board there, another board. In essence, you use lots of offcuts on a chaos board, which is really good because it does use up all that kind of wood that you wouldn't necessarily use for anything else. But equally, it's a lot of manpower to cut each of those kind of pieces up into strips, flatten each of the strips, glue each of the strips, wait for it to dry, recut it, reflatten it, and then repeat it over and over again. I lost count of the number of glue ups that I did on this board, but it was pretty high. And you're probably talking 7, 8 as a minimum, and that's with all the offcuts which had already been glued multiple times. I mean, the Union Jack board was a big one on its own, but it's worth it. It does give you a very distinctive looking board, and no two are the same, so every board that you make is perfectly unique. One thing I would say is that if you don't have a drum sander, then making a chaos board is going to be pretty tough. The amount of sanding to get flat surfaces is pretty high. I mean, you could use a planer if you've got a planer to do some of the surfacing of these pieces, but for me, I didn't really start doing any chaos boards until I got a drum sander, because the finish you get on that kind of glue edge is spot on with that drum sander. Here you can see me just playing with the pattern a bit, and you can see it's starting to get more and more random. The blocks are still quite high at this point, and what I'm doing here is trying to decide whether I want to cut at an angle or not. And the answer was yes, I did want to cut at an angle, so that each of the joins wasn't necessarily always 90 degrees. So the first chaos board I made, every piece of wood was at 90 degrees. There was no angled boards. So for this board I swapped it up and did a kind of angle cut, and here you can see me offsetting the wood as I'm gluing it, just to kind of increase that offset a little bit. It's different, and I do like it. There is part of my OCD nature that loves the 90 degree as well. What I would say is that this clamping here was possibly the hardest kind of clamping to get done, because trying to get that diagonal clamped properly across the whole length was really, really hard. So you can see that clamp that I just put on was a full clamp across the width, but most of the other clamps then become partial clamps because you can't clamp the full width, so you're clamping little pieces like you just saw there. So it does mean that you use an awful lot of clamps to get this board glued up correctly. Not the end of the world. But if you've only got 2 clamps, then this would be a tricky one. Let's just leave it at that. With each of my glue ups, I always leave them overnight. I don't tend to kind of risk leaving a 2-3 hour glue up and then removing the clamps. So I put the kind of the glue ups towards the back end of the day if I possibly can, and then pick up the next day. So you can see here that's that overnight done. I'm just knocking off some of the worst of the bits of glue, and you can see there that board's rocking. So those culls I didn't get perfect. So here I'm just pondering the best way to try and fix it, because from end, or the longest diagonal there across, it was quite out. So yeah, far from ideal, and definitely one to learn from. Getting that board flat makes life a lot easier going further down the kind of line. But here I draw a straight line, I cut to that straight line, and then I use the jointer again just to clean up that straight line, and then I cut strips along the kind of piece with the bandsaw, and just setting it up here, look. And then you're just cutting kind of 1 centimetre strips, and I think I did, in the end it was about 1 centimetre and then 1.5–2 centimetre strips, just to switch it up. And I can see here, I've never noticed it before, but the bandsaw moves when I push that wood in, so I need to tighten the rear guard on that bandsaw up a touch just to make that a little bit more accurate. As you say, you never stop learning. It's an angle you don't see when you're using a bandsaw yourself. I've never noticed the blade moving like that before, so one to have a little look at next time I'm in the garage. It's key to get all of these joints good, so using the bandsaw here, you want a real tight joint, and that's why I use the bandsaw really. The blade's only kind of a millimetre thick, so if I used a table saw, I'd be losing 3mm of material each time you do a cut. On the bandsaw, you're only losing 1mm, so it's a lot more efficient. But the downside of those angle cuts is that there is the kind of two end strips with the jagged parts that you kind of end up throwing away. And again, when the board's glued up again, you have another set of angled ends that you have to cut off as well. So it's not the most efficient kind of use of wood. The wastage is quite high. But it does mean that you get those weird and wonderful angles, and I do like those weird and wonderful angles, so it's one of those you're just going to have to live with. Here I'm using the drum sander again, and just loading up that drum sander to get each of the pieces through in time. I use a pencil on each side of the wood to know when I've kind of sanded across the whole face of the piece of wood, so that I know that it's perfectly level. And as you can see, I'm down to one piece now, so just kind of sorting it out, and then that's the second thickness that's just going through there, so that's the 1 centimetre thickness pieces. And again, just keep going through until all the sides are sanded and everything's got a perfectly flat edge, so that you can then get a real solid glue line. Here I'm starting to randomize again, so starting to create that kind of effect, and I'm randomizing the thicknesses as well as the pattern. You see there's just one piece that broke, which I then used a bit of glue just to tidy up and fix. It's coming on now, the board's starting to look something. I did have one piece that was slightly too small, so you can see me there just making a piece to fit in, and just make sure that that piece is exactly the right dimension so it will glue up properly. Here I am with my trusty roller, trying to get an even glue surface on all of the wood, so I can get a nice good glue joint. I put plenty of Type 1-3 on there. Strangely enough, it's not French's mustard. Here you can see I've got coals on it this time to try and keep it flat and kind of perfectly parallel, having made a pig's ear of it last time. Luckily, when I cut it down, a lot of the bow was taken out, but you can see here that that front edge is slightly lifted, so I'm using the router here to put a flat surface on the board, so I can then take it back to the drum sander to get a finished edge on it. And I must say, I did take off a little bit more than I was expecting on this board, mainly because of those kind of that bow that I induced. But lesson learned. It's really important to make sure everything's flat when you glue it up, otherwise you're going to be throwing away lots of wood shavings like I did here. As you can see, you do get a bit of chip out on the edges when I do that as well, but it's all good. I haven't squared the board up yet, so before doing that I take it back to the drum sander and I just sand back the planing mark, not planing marks, the router marks from the router sled off the board to get it nice and kind of smooth, ready for the festal for the next layer of sanding. See there, I changed the reel just to put some fresh paper in, and it's getting close at this stage. So again, I used a pencil, so I rub a pencil across the whole surface of the top, making sure I catch the low points, and then it just keeps going through the drum sander with me kind of rotating it about 0.2 of a millimetre each time. Once the drum sander's finished, and that's got 120 grit paper in it, I then go to 80 grit paper on the Festal, and you can see there I use a torch just to make sure that I get the swirl and scratch marks out of the board as I'm sanding it. So an LED light shining across the board is a very good way for seeing scratch marks on there, just to make sure that they're coming off. And the trusty pencil, just make sure you cover the whole surface. Once I've sanded it to, I think I went to 120 before I then trimmed the board down. So here I'm just making the two sides parallel, and then I put my trimming jig on the table saw and just square up that end either side, just to get good square board. And then you can see me using the framing square just to make sure that the board is actually square. Once I've done that, I come back to more sanding. So there is a lot of sanding on these boards, I have to say, and it's engram sanding, so it's not the easiest of sanding, so you do have to be a patient man. I do wish that I had someone that just did the sanding for me, to be honest, but I'm not lucky enough to be able to have a Greg like Bourbon Moth does, that does all of his sanding for him. Here you can see I use a jig to do the handholds, so I just clamp that on with a couple of grips and then route out using a 19mm cutter, and that then just creates a kind of handhold on the bottom of the board. So I do that at each end. It takes 3 or 4 passes to get that kind of finger hold in there. I think it looks quite distinctive. So after I've done the finger holds, I then use a chamfer, so a 45-degree bit across all of those edges, top and bottom. And when I did that on this board, I actually had a piece chip out. So when that chamfer went on, I had a lump of walnut crack off and a lump of Paduak pack off, which really didn't make my day. So in a minute you'll see me machine up a piece of wood to glue into those gaps to fix where that wood had chipped out, just to make kind of the best finish I possibly could. Here I used the RTS 400 just to get in those finger holds, a mixture of card scrapers, and then you can see me chiseling a bit of wood to fit the kind of bit of chip out that I got there. What I should have done is taken a close-up to show you in a bit more detail, but in essence there was two. There was one bit of walnut and then another bit of Paduak that had chipped out, so I just cut a piece to fit, glued it, clamped it, and then come back the next day with the Japanese pull saw and just cut it with a bit of sandpaper underneath, just so that it was close to the finished dimension, and then you see the chisel just trimmed it back. Then it was final sanding. I seem to get kind of a lot of grits on all these boards. So 80 is where I start after the drum sander, and then I go all the way up to 320, not missing any. So that's 80, 100, 120, 150, 180, 220, and then 300. And I do multiple water pots, so you can see a water pot there. And I tend to do those water pots on the last 3 grits as a general rule. Here I am getting set up for the branding iron. So I love this part. It means I'm getting towards the end. When I stick the branding iron on, I've normally only got 220 or 180, 220 kind of grits left to go. So it signifies getting towards the tail end. I'm just trimming up the chamfers, making them all neat and tidy. Final sanding, and it's getting to the point where oil is going to go on. So all my boards, I use Osmo oil. So I use Osmo extra thin to start with, just to let that soak in, and then after that's gone in, I then use Osmo's top oil, so natural satin. I'm really happy with it. I use it on all my boards, have done for years now. Never any complaints. very easy to refinish, and if you need to sand it back, it doesn't clog the paper as badly as some other finishes do. So you can see me there with a tin of extra fine, and I basically just do all 4 sides and just keep, well, it's more than 4, isn't it? 6 sides. Just keep kind of putting it in, rubbing it, and then before it's kind of goes thick enough, I then just knock it back with a bit of a rag just to take off any kind of pooling or residual. Then you can see the top oil here. So I'm using a like a Scotch-Brite pad for this board. Just try something different. I saw a YouTube saying it's you get a better finish using Scotch-Brite, so I tried it. I can't say I noticed a massive difference, to be honest, but then I didn't do a half-half test, so half the board with and without. And here's the final touch, feet. Once the feet go on, you know you're done. And that is the Chaos board. So here we have some glamour shots, and this is the point I say, hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, I'd love you to smash the buttons, like and subscribe. If I've made mistakes, tell me what I've done wrong, tell me how I can make it better. But hopefully you enjoyed watching this video and you stayed to the end. If you did, well done. Woodwork Geek out.